Now, new rules governing short-term lets are set to come into force ahead of the 2026 tourist season, with major implications for Airbnb hosts right across this county. With rent pressure zones now nationwide and new planning and registration requirements on the way, there is growing uncertainty for people renting out short-term accommodation. Joining us to discuss the impact is the Lahinch Fine Gael councillor Bill Slattery, who has raised the issue at Clare County Council. Bill, a very good morning to you. Thanks for being with us on the show.
Good morning, Alan.
There seems to be maybe quite a bit of confusion among hosts ahead of the upcoming tourist season. Bill, what are you hearing from people on the ground, and what prompted you to raise this issue now?
Well, what I'm hearing from people on the ground was actually concern, and this is happening since last November, since this was first muted that the Department of Housing and Enterprise were going to have new regulations and restrictions on people that were doing short-term lets. So I couldn't get any information from any of our elected members or our senators. So I put down a motion for the Clare County Council planning section last Monday to see could I get some response so that people would know of what they have to do or what they're supposed to do, because I couldn't get a response. They were saying the legislation is not in yet, but it's coming down the tracks in May. And people were getting very concerned that, as you know, I'm coming from a high wind zone pressure area here in Lahinch, and a lot of people are depending on Airbnbs in this area. So I just asked the question, especially for the planning section, because as I couldn't get an answer, I did see an article from a letter from under the Freedom of Information Act that was sent by Michael Healy-Rae to Micheál Martin and Simon Harris last week, on the 2nd of January. And he is very concerned of what's going to happen to the short-term lets.
Bill, can you explain in plain terms for listeners who mightn't be fully up to date on this, how the new short-term letting and tourism bill will change things for hosts in Clare?
Well, according to Micheál Martin, according to Michael Healy-Rae, in his freedom and the letter that he sent to the Taoiseach, he says that including the terms a requirement for planning permission for short-term lets, which previously did not apply to many rural areas, and a population threshold bringing its restrictions on new short-term lets in the large towns and cities. Now, this has prompted a lot of concerns, because in my area, some people are depending on short-term lets, their education, their children, some of them are retired. They have, which they converted garages and stuff like that, and they have been filling the gap that wasn't there, because with the last 3 or 4 years, you know, most of our hotels have went for the more lucrative money that was coming in from the country with the international protection and with the Ukrainians. And if the short-term beds hadn't been there with the last 3 or 4 years, our tourist industry would have been destroyed. And the people now that are, there should be a threshold on this, or I would say, in the large towns and cities, but not in rural Ireland.
Okay,
I mean, it's crazy in out the country, because these are the people that have been keeping the tourist business going for the last couple of years. And if you can go back, Alan, years go back in the 70s and 80s, Forge Ireland were actually promoting farmhouse accommodation and all that for people to come down to the country and stay in the country and stay in these houses. And then they kind of caught on that people might start doing bed and breakfast, and the visitors love that concept of coming into the countryside, coming in. I suppose,
yeah. I know. I take the point you're making, Bill. I suppose they would say, well, that was a different time and different circumstances. Let's bring in Lorna Cahill, who's also with us. Lorna's an Airbnb host in North Clare. Good morning to you, Lorna.
Good morning, Alan. How are you? Hi, Bill.
Very, very well, Lorna. So, look, how are you feeling about these upcoming changes? Is there kind of a bit of confusion, a lot of uncertainty around it for yourself? And presumably you'd agree with Bill that, you know, rural areas, and particularly in Clare, maybe should be a kind of a different element to the rules than more urban areas?
I'm actually absolutely sick to my stomach at the thoughts of what's coming down the line. I cannot plan anything for this year or beyond, because I don't know if I will have any income after May 20th. I've spoken to you before, and you know that I'm a host leader with Airbnb. It's a voluntary role, so I am in contact with hosts on a daily basis in Clare, Limerick and Tipperary, but also with hosts throughout the country. My phone has not stopped because people are worried sick. So many of the hosts are women. They're over 50. They're carers. A lot are caring for partners, husbands, children, parents. They need to remain in the home, and this enables them to do so. The anxiety levels are absolutely through the roof. We, as a group, the host leader group, we actually went to the Dáil in November, and we were given the opportunity to address the Oireachtas Committee. And they listened and they took on board all of our concerns, but we have heard nothing back. We were then invited to Brussels in December, and we were listened to, but again, no feedback, nothing has come back. So basically what's going to happen is on the 20th of May, we will all be required to register.
And Lorna, what impact, when you were required to register in May, and we'll talk maybe about the time frame as well, because that is not that far away, what impact could these new regulations have on your ability to operate during the upcoming tourist season?
They will close me down. That is the bottom line.
Plain and simple, you won't be able to operate at all?
I will not be able to operate, and nor will most hosts here in Clare. That is the bottom line. We cannot continue to operate. And
just before I go back to Bill, is there maybe a lack of clarity from some of the host perspective when you hear material change of use, rent pressure zones, planning consent, that maybe it's a lack of clarity or there's an element of confusion as well as to what's expected?
There's huge confusion, and I actually have sympathy for the planning departments, because the planning departments are operating in the dark. They do not have the NPS, the National Planning Statement. This is what we are all waiting on. And we have been given a piece of paper, and it's up on the Department of Housing's website, where they clearly say that the second part of the NPS is a more granular, practical guidance that will afford flexibility to planning departments as to how they implement the principles, right, of the NPS and the measures. That's so vague. That's really wishy-washy. That means that each planning department can almost, they will have flexibility. But how much flexibility? And will some be more strident than others? So that's actually quite frightening. They also say that they will remove reference to RPZs from the Planning Act as they relate to short-term lets, to ensure that planning permission is required nationwide. As you know, there are very few properties here in Clare that will get planning permission because they are granny flats, yurts, lodges, lofts. I had a look this morning on Airbnb, and the number of lofts, it's quite staggering. People have been very creative over the last few years, and they have converted their lofts. So they're advertised as entire units. The whole point of this register, this directive came from Europe, and what Europe wanted was data. They wanted each country to have proper figures and numbers on exactly what types of short-term lets are out there. And it was also to introduce some controls around housing.
Bill,
we have been asking... No, sorry, but I'll just say real quick. We have been asking for the last 2 years that this register be introduced. We really welcome it. Please introduce the register. Keep the planning side separate. And after a period of 12, 24 months, then we can look at how it goes forward. But in the meantime, just get the information, because the government has no idea as to the number of STRs that are actually out there.
And Bill, from what Lorna's saying, there's the mass confusion, fear as well, and that timeline, the legislation ties in with the EU regulations that take effect in May. How tight is the timeline for compliance or to try and sort this out? It seems like that just time isn't on the side of people like Lorna.
No, it's not. And the reason actually I put down, my most concern, it wasn't the registration, it was the planning. And what is going to concern the planning office in Innis is that the staff in the planning office won't be able to do this because they haven't literally got the staff, right? And this is coming down, and this was implemented by the 26th of May. But the reply I got from Helen Quinn, the senior planner, was that the short-term letting and tourism bill 2025 provides for the following. All properties offered for short-term letting up to 21 nights must register with Fudge Ireland. Lorna is agreeable with that, okay? Now, hosts will receive a unique registration number which must be displayed on all listing, example Airbnbs. Online platforms, Airbnb, Booking.com, must verify and display this number. Non-compliance can lead to fines of up to 2% of annual turnover of platforms. Right, that's registration. But it's the planning sections I was worried about, and the planning implications. It says, as part of the measures to help address pressures in the private housing rental market, they're reckoning, and this is Michael Healy raised, they're saying that this is going to bring back in 10,000 houses back in for use. Which Michael Healy raised says it is no way is that going to happen. It's not going to work that way. But it says that the response I got from Helen was the use of a house or part of a house situated in a rent pressure zone for short-term letting purposes is a material change in use of the house or part thereof. In effect, this regulation means that a material change of use occurs where a residential property is put into short-term letting use such that it requires the benefit of a planning consent. Any property owners who intend to operate a short-term let in the 2026 tourist season or thereafter should engage with the planning authority to establish what planning consent requirements they may have ahead of the season. Failure to appropriate planning consent in place ahead of letting will result in an unauthorised development taking place and potential enforcement action. But the problem here is that holiday homes are exempt. And I know in Lahinch and in Milton Malva and Spanish Point that there are holiday homes that are doing Airbnb. So, I mean, why is a holiday home exempt? And Lorna said there, where you have converted an annex or a garage that you have to comply with planning regulations. It's totally crazy.
And Lorna, yeah, that from your perspective, that does seem very, very frustrating. That ultimately, is there much of a difference between the two?
There is no difference. There is no difference whatsoever. The only difference is that people bought houses. Well, I can't remember what the funding was under, and they were specifically labelled as holiday homes. I bought a house which was labelled as a home, which had a granny flat attached to it. And to enable me to stay at home and raise my children, I started doing Airbnb in the granny flat. There is no difference whatsoever. It's the whole crux of this is the planning, and we've spoken to planning departments all over the country, and we've spoken to hosts. Nobody is getting planning. Everybody is being refused. You know, I think it's 30% nationwide have been approved, 70% have not. That's a terrifying figure.
Yeah, Bill, do you think the council's adequately prepared to deal with what will surely be a significant increase in planning queries and applications?
Certainly not. They won't be able to supervise or enforce what's been what they're thinking of doing here. I can't see the planning office, and that was my main concern was: is the planning office going to be overwhelmed now with a plethora of planning applications coming in, along with the existing planning for houses and other buildings in the area? And I can't see this working. And Michael Healy has said in the end of that he will not be supporting this bill. Then he said that he'll wait and see what's going to be enacted. And before it's enacted, he said that he certainly will not be supporting it in its present form. And I am totally in agreement with him. And I got support from nearly 28 councillors, and they all spoke on it. We're all from the rural part, and we're all in high pressure rent zones since 2025. And every one of the councillors support that this should not be happening, and it's not going to happen if Clare County Council or if our Oireachtas members in Clare protest that this should not happen.
Lorna, look, you know the argument is, look, these measures, they're needed to help ease the housing crisis. As someone providing tourist accommodation, how would you respond to that? And you've said that these changes will put you out of business, but your granny flat, is there an alternative for you to rent that out long term to somebody? Or if you can't do it, use it as a short term let, will you just knock it on the head?
I'll just knock it on the head, and so will the thousands of hosts I've spoken to across the country. I have no desire to be a landlord. I share my garden with my guests. I enjoy spending time with the guests. This is my job. I don't want to be a landlord, and my apartment is not suitable.
And what can I ask what your concerns are around the long-term aspect? Is it just that, the longer someone stays with you, the more potential there is for problems to creep in and friction, or do you just don't want to be planning that far ahead, or are there other issues as potential issues
I don't want to have to plan 6 years in advance. That would be one concern. Another is that my daughters and my grandchildren and my family from Dublin, they come down, they use the accommodation. So it's always in use, whether it be family or guests, particularly in the summer. I would feel sorry for somebody living in mine long term because there's no storage space. It's very, very small.
So it's not ideal anyway from a long term perspective.
And as are the majority, from what I'm hearing from hosts, particularly here in West Clare. Lovely places to stay in the summer, but not suitable for long-term letting, and nobody wants to be a landlord.
Okay, well look, it's clear from what you're saying that from a tourism perspective this could be extremely damaging to areas like your own in North Clare. What kind of guidance or support, Lorna, would you like to see from the local authority or Fáilte Ireland on this?
I would love them to introduce the register as planned on the 26th of May, and that it is that, just a register, and that the government goes away and over the next 24 months they actually look. The register is too simplistic. The questions, it's not a deep dive. I need to be able to explain when registering that mine is a granny flat. It's attached to my home, that guests are in and out to me the whole time. This, although advertised as an entire unit, it is not an entire unit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
We need to be able to explain that yes, it's a converted loft or it's a shepherd's hut. So we need to be able to explain exactly what it is that we're offering and why it's not suitable for long-term letting. And then when they have the numbers of what is and isn't, that is when they can add in additional legislation. But they need to get the facts and figures first. They don't have them. This is just them coming in, personally, I think, with an iron fist. And it was deemed a couple of years back that if they introduced this legislation, there would be 12,000 or more properties available for the long-term market. That is nonsense. There will not be, and I can guarantee you there won't. And we've even sent to our local representatives, we've sent them information from other countries around the world and what happened when they came down really heavy, in the hope that they would introduce more long-term accommodation.
Okay,
it didn't materialise.
It didn't work out. Okay, well look,
no.
we have to leave it there, but certainly plenty needs to happen between now and May, that is for sure. My thanks to Lorna Cahill there, an Airbnb host in North Clare, and to the Lahinch Fine Gael councillor Bill Slattery for being with us.